I'm dealing right now with a client that has 2 storefronts and 6 studio apartments. The apartments are rent stabilized, so there's definitely a control over what could be done, what cannot be done as far as the increase of the rent. And the storefront commercial space, it's most likely free and clear. So there is 2 businesses that are very actively successfully operating at the moment.
Yes.
But I think the challenge comes in such unique cases, how to come up with appraisal value. So you don't undersell and you don't overprice. What would be your best piece of advice? What characteristics do you guys suggest we personally as brokers have to look into in order to understand the logistics of the numbers?
The appraisal process consists of 3 different approaches. So we have the sales approach that everyone knows about, where we get comparable sales, right? Also known as comps. The second approach is called an income approach, where we analyze the income producing potential of the commercial or of the investment property, which is what you have here.
Correct.
And the third approach is called the cost approach, which is basically it's typically applied to super unique properties where there's no comps and there's no income, and we have to analyze what would it take to build an equal type of property. So we look at the cost.
Are you talking about profit and loss?
So for the income approach, what we generally do as appraisers is we analyze the income generating potential of the property, right? We look at their leases, we look at their market, we look at their contracts, and we make sure that we also look at historical income and expense statements. And that kind of helps us stabilize the future income generating potential of the property. So we have our own little, so to say, cash flow analysis that we perform. And based on what the net operating income produces, we apply what's called a capitalization rate, which is basically a risk assessment rate for that specifically asset class or for that property type. Typically, more risky properties, they have higher capitalization rates, and less risky properties have lower capitalization rates. How do we determine the risk? Well, it really, again, comes down to the market. We look at comparable properties in the market, and we try to extract what's called the capitalization rate. And that's pretty much how we determine the valuation process of the income producing or commercial producing properties.
This is so interesting, Julia. In many cases, investors are expecting to buy with a good profit margin. Let's say, what would be the ideal number that is a good buy for investors?
It's a subjective number. Some investors may come in with zero income, and they just, do their own they put in their own tenants, they put in their own leases, and they find value in that. Whereas some investors may want already a fully stabilized building,
right,
where there's tenants in place,
return
leases
on
in
their
place.
investment, right?
I would say it's kind of a subjective question, and it really depends on the investor,
on the desire of the potential investor.
So there's investors, they kind of stay in their market, right? So multifamily investor stays in the multifamily category, right? The industrial investor stays in the industrial. Why? Because that's their asset class. They know their asset class. They know the cap rates. They know the numbers. And in today's day and age, buyers, investors, even sellers, very savvy, very knowledgeable. They have everything, on an app. They could just research comps. They could research market rents, and boom, they kind of know what things should be and where they should be. So
Julie, if let's say a seller is listening to us right now, let's say they have a property, and we are generally speaking of an example that's mixed use, right? What would be your piece of advice to them? How to prepare before they even contact the broker, before they put the property on the market?
For a mixed-use property.
Yes. So what exactly, what data do you think they need to prepare?
So typically what I request from my clients are 3 years of historical income and expense statements. And it will be the most recent one if we're doing a current valuation. And also current leases and a rent roll if there's residential rents. So that's pretty much what I typically ask. If there are lease riders or lease extensions, I would ask for that as well, because typically if a lease expires and the tenant extends the lease, I need to know what the terms are of that extension. So that's pretty much what I require.
So if the property, let's say, has 6 apartments and 2 of them become vacant, does it put the seller in a position that they are in a better appraisal state because they could increase now monthly profits?
Right. So as appraisers, the way we analyze it is just because even if there's a vacancy, we have to apply a rent to it because we have to analyze it based on what a typical investor or landlord would do. I've seen scenarios where multifamily buildings, a majority of them are owner occupied, right? The parents live in one unit, the siblings live in another, cousins, whatnot. And so it's an income property, but it's not generating any income, right? So what an appraiser would do in that situation is we would have to apply, unless there's rent regulation boards, but we would have to apply what's called a market rent. So what would that unit go for under current market conditions? Would have to apply market rents to those units to stabilize the building.
Interesting. What other operating expenses you guys look into to understand whether the building is profitable?
Well, most important thing is, are the rents and leases at market? If the rents and leases are at market and the building is fully stabilized, the building is in a better financial position. I had clients that have, properties weren't really adequately managed and there were leases that were expired and, tenants were paying whatever they could. So in that situation, that does not put the building in a good financial standing because it's not generating at its full potential.
Right. How do you determine the value if the building is totally free and clear from tenants and vacant?
So it depends on the property. We typically, like I said, analyze the property from all components, right? We look at the site size, gross living area, building class, taxes, zoning. If there's no lease and the highest and best uses for redevelopment, that's a development site. So it's not necessarily a building appraisal, that's a land appraisal. Whereas it could be the opposite. The building could be over-improved and the zoning would not allow a big improvement. So whoever would buy it, they would not tear it down. So we have to analyze what would a typical buyer do for that particular asset class. So if someone would buy it, they would probably either fix it up and put a market tenant in there, or maybe, if it's a single tenant, do a triple net lease where the tenant would be responsible for all the expenses. So it really depends on the property type and where it's located and what the zoning is and all the other characteristics that affect property value.
We had an example, right? Where a property, let's say, on one street could cost at a certain number.
Right.
And across the street, because it's R6 zoning, could be a completely different value.
Right.
How do you not get confused over that?
Zoning is a big component and impact on property valuation, obviously, because again, you have to think from the standpoint of a typical investor, typical buyer. Just because there's a single family house on it, it doesn't mean it's a single family house appraisal. If you have a nice sized lot and a zoning that allows for much bigger improvement, again, that becomes a development site appraisal. So that is completely a different valuation than a property across the street that maybe only be zoned for that single family property that's already on it. So you have to kind of be careful. And we've seen it also, I'm sure you've seen it in your sphere and I've seen it in my sphere where, neighbors look at the transactions on the block and they say, well, he sold for that one, so mine is worth this much. Not always the case.
Correct. Well, I have a case right now where it's a very interesting situation where, look, it's honestly, it's happened right before my eyes. I've never witnessed anything like this. It's a true story as I'm speaking to you. So we sold 2 properties next to each other. It's R6 zoning, and investor and developer is working on it and building there right now. It's going to be a rental building. It's in a residential area. To the left, there is another property that's, again, buildable, where the homeowner just couldn't come to the terms with this builder. And to the right, now I'm dealing with 2 that's pretty much stuck with this building.
Right.
When it comes to cases like that, you could tell my life was never boring, right? So a client calls me and says, Olga, last year when you sold these 2 properties, you offered me this much. I said no to you.
Right.
And obviously it's a huge mistake. Now I understand. can you bring this same investor back to buy my property? And you can only imagine the answer to that, right?
Right.
So they're never getting the same price. And now they're stuck in the middle of the building.
The improvement.
We're now to the left, to the right. I'm standing looking at this street, and I'm trying to figure out what's the right way to go about this.
Right.
And I never turn business down, and I always like challenges. But in this particular case, what would be your best piece of advice? How would you navigate this type of a client? How to deal with something that got burned right before your eyes, where they turned down a solid offer who was proposed by the same investor and builder. They lost before my eyes. I am telling you as I'm speaking, just gives me goosebumps. They lost about $500,000 from what they are being offered right now to what they were offered right before he bought the other two properties.
Right.
So having the client lose $500,000 right before my eyes sometimes puts me in a position where it's like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Real estate world could be such an interesting pool where it just never gets boring. What would you be saying right now when the construction is going on?
That's crazy.
To the left, to the right. Now I'm dealing with 3 individuals who are looking to sell because they're now dealing with the building coming up right before their eyes.
Right.
So they have 2-family residentials or single-family residentials on a 6-family zoning, and now I'm dealing with a building that's coming up. It's just insane.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I feel like the case of if you snooze, you lose, right?
Yeah.
You got to stay on it. And I see it myself time and time again where people get overzealous. Their egos,
overexcited.
Egos come into place, right? And unfortunately, you can't go with feelings. You really have to be rational.
Logic.
And you have to listen to the professional.
Correct.
You hire a broker, you hire an appraiser, let them do their job and listen to their conclusions, listen to what they're telling you. These are people who are in this business day in and day out. They know what they're doing. So you have to take really feelings and emotions aside and deal with the logic. And I wish I could tell you what the best thing to do is now in this case, but it's a tough call.
It's a tough call. It's a tough call. I'm going to manage to deal with them. I don't think the same investor and developer would be interested in buying those properties at the moment because I think he wants to buy them dirt cheap.
Right.
And he wants to kind of like steal them because now he's leveraging the situation.
Of course.
And I would do the same thing.
Of course.
I would do the same thing if I were to be in his shoes. My concern is that when the building will go up, and let's pretend they didn't sell, and I'm telling them right now to steal, please, let's get on the market. Let's find another investor and developer. Let's sell the property while we have the opportunity of having this building come up. There will be other investors and developers that potentially could be interested in building.
Right.
But let's pretend they didn't sell. Again, the ego is they are where they feel I could get more, I could do more, I could get better. Let them pay the broker's fee.
Yep.
That happens all day long. What do you think will happen when the building is done? Will it increase or decrease the value?
I think the developer should kind of, even if they don't come to a conclusion, he needs to know that this guy in the middle will be a problem.
Yep.
Regardless of whether he builds around him or wherever, this is going to be a problem that's not going to go away. The best thing to do is to figure out a way where both parties can be happy and make some kind of a deal and move on.
Be on the same page, right?
Yeah. I mean, why would you want, it's like having a bad neighbor, right?
Yeah.
You always want to have a good relationship with your neighbor. And here you have this situation where you're building around him. You don't think he's going to be spiteful? You don't think he's going to be calling Department of Buildings? You don't think he's going to be creating problems for you down the road? Of course he will. So you got to kind of be smart about it and find the beautiful middle so both parties can be happy.
Well, that's the challenge we face as brokers in many cases, right? Mm-hmm. Where we are directing our clients and clearly telling them that we have a vision to what could happen down the road.
Yep.
And money gets on the way. And in many cases, clients just get excited, I should say.
Yep.
Blood rush gets on the way. They get excited. They don't feel like it's the right deal. You are definitely able to get more, go try to get more. And in the end of the day, what happens? The bubble bursts,
And that's
and
it.
now they can get nothing.
Lost the opportunity.
They lost the opportunity. They lost 500,000 right before my eyes. And it becomes very, very challenging. So we deal with this
I've
day
seen
in,
this
day
myself.
out, right?
Yeah, I've had a similar situation where the client was, very emotionally invested. That's the word I can use, and just had a number set in their mind. And even though offers were coming in, close to that, but not really at that point, they said no, more, and then the bubble
burst.
Happened, and guess what? Lost everything and
Lost
sold
the
it
opportunity.
probably for much, much less.
Yes.
And had no other choice, had to sell.
Exactly.
So,
Well, I think real estate world is such a very interesting, very diverse, very challenging world where you can't put your brain to sleep, right? You have to constantly stay alert, have to constantly watch the news. Interest rates are growing. That affects investors on a very big scale. That affects the cost of building on a very big scale. A lot of builders right now are telling me, I have a lot of builders in the family. A lot of builders are telling me that right now it's not worth to buy a certain number. It's not even worth to buy the number that they thought of buying during COVID or prior to that. The numbers are coming much lower. Why? Because the cost of construction, the cost of building is completely different. Everything went up.
yes.
And their profit margins are completely on a different scale.
Yep.
So that's why we can't really follow the numbers to what was happening 2 years ago, 3 years ago,
Yes.
even to what happening a year ago.
Right.
So everything changes so rapidly all the time that I think that we have to stay very alert. We have to keep, really with the flow of how the market is performing and stay very, very up to date with all the changes.
Yes.
If you really need to move and you really need to sell and you really need to get rid of whatever the situation you're in right now, my best piece of advice would be to just move on. Move on, do what you have to do, hire the professional, do the best you can. Let us do our job. Let us perform the best expertise and knowledge into the place where it could then result into getting you top dollar. Interestingly enough, even living in New York City, we constantly have market that goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And our job is to really get the right buyer with the right terms that is ready, willing, and able to execute into a good contract that is going to be there all the way until the closing and will execute itself with a good positive outcome that would result in getting the sellers, money in the bank and them moving on with their life.
Yes.
Money is important, but I think timing is more important.
Yes.
And timing is so important that you don't want to be sitting in your property and really trying to catch every piece of every dollar, and then you're missing out on life.
Yeah. You have to know your wins and your losses.
Absolutely. So life gets on the way. The opportunities get on the way. There is so much going on in life that we need to just keep going. And Julia, I really thank you for your time today. It was such a very important conversation we had that was very significant. It definitely is a topic that will be doing extremely well, I'm sure, on YouTube channels for you and myself, where a lot of my clients will be watching. I will direct them all to make sure that they keep watching, get education, because as you know, I'm building a channel that is free. I'm taking my personal business and time into situations where I'm trying to pour my knowledge and invite very knowledgeable guests like you to really share your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience, and give this back to our communities for free. People can subscribe to our channels. People can watch. People can definitely learn so much from these episodes and really understand that all we need from you is just click the subscribe button, keep following, keep listening, and keep sharing with everyone you love. So at least one person could get an impact from this and really learn and make a difference in their life and hopefully impact their families and their bank accounts.
Yes, correct.
Thanks everyone for watching. We love you all. Thanks for staying tuned. Keep watching our episodes and we have so much more to come. Thank you.